Hello, Facebook. Hello, Instagram. Hello, world. Welcome to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast, your source, as always, of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm your host, Dr. Benjamin Alter.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Susanna Alter.
And we're excited to dive into this one. Hello, Ellen. She's joined. And yeah, we're excited to dive into this one. Susanna's kind of leading the way. And for those new listeners tuning in for the first time, hey there, nice to connect with you. And you can feel free to subscribe and to rate and to review this podcast wherever you're tuning in from. We appreciate that. And also share it into the world with a friend or a family member, maybe someone who has been dealing with iron deficiency. Maybe you know someone like that out in the world, like Susanna has in her past, but not anymore. And that's what this episode is all about: healing iron deficiency with plants. Mm-hmm. How did you do it, Susanna?
Well, yeah. So in this episode, we really want to address one of the common misconceptions about a plant-based diet, which is that it's harder for people on a plant-based diet to get the adequate amounts of dietary iron. This is simply not true. And first I'll start off with, some hardcore evidence. There's studies showing that vegans and vegetarians are actually no more prone to suffering from iron deficiency than those people who eat meat, and that actually vegetarians and vegans get more iron in their diet on a daily basis than those who eat meat, which is maybe a shocking statistic for some of you out there.
You've got to be kidding me.
But if you think about it,
that's not what the hamburger salesman told me.
Mm-hmm. And it's true that meat is a very high source of iron, most heme iron, really. Yeah. And we're going to get into heme versus non-heme iron later. But if you think about the plant kingdom, whole grains, legumes, dark green leafy vegetables, even fruit, they all have iron in it. So,
yeah. Well, iron, so where does it come from? It comes from fruit. I mean, it comes from plants, but where does it come from?
Comes from the soil.
Yeah. It's a mineral, and all minerals, obviously, if we just take a step back and think the earth is this ball, this rock, this mineral dense rock orb flying through the outer space, and that rock of the earth is made up of all these minerals, iron being one of them, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, sulfur. All the minerals that make up your body also make up the rock that is the earth. So
right. And we want the optimal amount of iron in our bodies. We don't want too little, we don't want too much. When there is too much, that can predispose us to certain disease states like heart disease, diabetes, cancer. Yep. We'll talk more about the pro-oxidative effect of heme iron a little later on. But for those people who have too little amount of iron in their blood, they might experience shortness of breath. They might have weird cravings for non-food-like items like ice or dirt or hair.
Yeah.
Pica. Usually they just feel fatigued and run down for no real reason, and you may experience paleness in their skin and their conjunctiva. There's other signs that come up.
And maybe we could take 1 minute to just distinguish the two major types of anemia.
Sure.
Because a lot of people hear the term anemia and they immediately think about iron. And there's a whole other cause of anemia that is unrelated to iron that I've experienced. And that's B12 or folate deficiency, otherwise called megaloblastic anemia or macrocytic anemia, where the red blood cells get big and they are actually too old and unable to optimally carry out their task. And iron deficiency anemia is kind of on the other side of the spectrum. It's otherwise called microcytic anemia, where the red blood cells stay really small and puny, and they're unable to carry optimal amounts of hemoglobin and oxygen to deliver oxygen throughout the body, and because that's what blood cells do. But both of the symptoms of anemia can be similar. Fatigue, lightheadedness, faintness, paleness, that can be consistent between iron deficiency or megaloblastic B12 folate deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And there are other forms of anemia. I mean, basically
Mhm.
what anemia means is there's reduced oxygen carrying capacity in the red blood cells.
Mhm.
And so we're not going to really focus on all the different types of anemia today. Today we're focusing on iron deficiency anemia.
And people can be, correct me if I'm wrong, Susanna, because you're more of an expert having been through this, but people can be iron deficient without being straight out anemic, right? There is this kind of middle ground where there's, suboptimal iron stores. Hemoglobin is still maintained, but it's still, they're on their way to anemia, but their body is compensating.
It's true. It's true. Yes. So, okay, where do we want to go next?
Well, so do you want to just share a little bit about your story? Because you've had a long history of iron deficiency.
Yes.
That stems far beyond your being plant-based.
Yes.
And,
all right.
We could even, your story will share, we can even conclude that being plant-based has helped you heal the iron deficiency anemia, right?
It's true. It's true.
Sorry to spoil the story.
Okay, so my history, and thank you all for, allowing us to get personal with you. I know we tend to do this a lot, and hey, it shows our humanness, right?
We are humans, and we've been through a lot of this stuff, and we're learning with you guys. We're learning with you guys, and obviously we're learning through our medical education. But practically speaking, we're practicing lifestyle medicine. We're healing ourselves through our lives, through our nutrition, through the way that we're living and behaving on a day-to-day basis, and we're sharing that information based on our kind of trial and success. Not so many errors, in our health. There have been, of course, but we're focusing on the success, not the errors.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so my history of iron deficiency started when I was 15. And this was actually the time in my life when I was struggling with anorexia. And so the likely cause of my iron deficiency at that point was probably lack of sufficient intake of iron. So I needed to work on,
and all other nutrients.
And all other nutrients, exactly, not just iron. And so I, needed to work to get these iron stores up. I remember the doctor actually said, well, actually, no, that was later on. After I had moved through my eating disorder, and I was now 17, I had my blood redrawn because I was feeling very fatigued, very winded whenever I would play tennis or whatever sports I was actively engaged in. And so I got blood work done, and the doctor said, okay, you are borderline, needing a blood transfusion right now. I remember I was concerned because the following summer I was planning on going on a backpacking trip in Colorado, and she would not sign me off as, okay, physical exam, okay, until I got my hemoglobin levels back up. And so I didn't want the blood transfusion. I wanted to do it naturally. And so I supplemented with iron supplements and, just kind of accepted, okay, I guess I just have the body type that needs to eat a lot of red meat. And so anyway, I got my iron levels back up.
With supplements?
With supplements and with food, and was on my way to college, and didn't really get my blood checked again until probably 5 years later, when, again, I was iron deficient. And through these 5 years, I had been eating a lot of red meat. I was certainly nourishing myself, getting in enough food.
You were on kind of the paleo spectrum of
Exactly,
things.
exactly. Yeah. And so, that's when I really started scratching my head. Like, okay, I'm clearly eating enough iron-rich foods. Why am I still iron deficient? And that's when, I realized, okay, there's other causes of iron deficiency other than just not eating enough iron.
What are those?
Well, for me, it was certainly my GI issues. This was right around the time when I was developing a lot of inflammation in my digestive tract.
And then the other, and then bleeding is another cause.
It's true, but as a woman, I've always had fairly light menstrual cycles. So certainly for those who do have heavy menstrual cycles, loss of blood is the other factor. So there's really 3 factors when we look at causes of iron deficiency, and they are not taking in enough, not absorbing enough, losing too much. Oh, and there's actually one more factor, which is there's certain times of life when your body just requires more iron, and pregnancy is one. And then also when you're little and you're just growing really fast, you also might need a little bit more iron. But anyway, yes, so I was dealing with digestive issues and still having iron deficiency anemia despite the amount of red meat I was eating. And fast forward, I think I at that point I started supplementing actually with hydrochloric acid to stimulate my digestive system, and actually didn't follow up my lab results until 3 years later when I was still iron deficient. And so at this point, I think I was like 27, still eating red meat. Thought I had healed my GI symptoms. I mean, my symptoms were gone, but apparently there is still some lack of absorption in my intestines.
Or maybe it had to do with the fact that you weren't giving your body the proper form of iron.
Okay, so
I don't know.
Let's get into that.
Or maybe the digestive inflammation or whatever was going on was exacerbated by the diet that maybe it wasn't causing any digestive symptoms, but that doesn't mean that it's an optimally healing diet for the digestive tract.
Exactly. So, okay, now I'm celebrating because this is, 3 years later since my last blood draw. And for the first time,
we just got our labs done like 6 weeks ago now or so now.
Yes. Yeah. So the first time in 15 years, this might actually be my first ever perfect CBC panel where my red blood cell count is perfect, my hemoglobin, my hematocrit, they're all perfect.
Mine was perfect too.
And my ferritin, which ferritin are our reserves of iron, our iron stores. And my ferritin is perfect. And I haven't had meat in nearly 2 years. Mm-hmm. So, okay, let's figure this out.
There was low ferritin, low iron, low hemoglobin, low hematocrit, low red blood cells, low, eating meat, low. Stop eating meat, start eating more plants, and everything goes high. Everything optimizes.
Exactly.
So that, and I don't think that is an uncommon occurrence. It's not like Susanna, it's not like you're an anomaly.
Mm-hmm. And I will say it's iron deficiency. What we're seeing is that it does affect obviously meat eaters. It can also affect people on a plant-based diet too if they're having digestive issues.
So what do you think, there's obviously that we need to cover the heme iron versus non-heme iron, because you were eating a lot of heme iron that is found in red blood cells of animals, essentially eating animal blood in the form of meat. And non-heme iron is iron that is not in the hemoglobin molecule, but in the elemental form that's derived from the soil through plants.
Exactly.
So we need to talk about that. And what else do you think we need to talk about to explain how your body healed this iron deficient state with plants?
Well, I mean, in my specific case, I really do think that it was because my digestive system was exacerbated by the animal foods that I was eating. It was causing more inflammation in my GI tract. It was bringing in, pathogens, and it was messing up with my microbiome, which if you want to learn more about microbiome, listen to our microbiome episode. But yeah, as soon as I cleaned up the diet and focused on plants, my intestines could finally heal and absorb iron. And you're right, in the non-heme iron state. But what's interesting is that when we talk about different forms of iron, nutritionally, conventionally, people understand that heme iron is more absorbable than non-heme iron. So they say that I
don't know about more absorbable, but more maybe bioavailable or complete, because essentially what happens when we absorb iron from plants, we biosynthesize a hemoglobin molecule, which is a little iron element with these porphyrin rings, they're called, that encapsulate this big elaborate molecule that carries oxygen around the body. So hemoglobin requires one little iron molecule and then a bunch of these other proteins or molecules around it to biosynthesize the complete hemoglobin molecule. So when we eat meat, we're eating the heme iron. We're eating the iron that's in the complete hemoglobin molecule form. And there's this theory that, oh, the body is able to just put that directly into its own bloodstream, and that hemoglobin that we eat through animal flesh and animal blood goes right into our bloodstream. And it turns out it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it seems like it's a more efficient process.
But I don't know if there's science around this, but my brain tells me that, well, when we eat the heme iron, we actually have to break it down into its iron and then hemoglobin components, and then resynthesize it. I don't know if that's really what happens, but I think it must be something like that. I don't know if anyone really knows exactly what happens, but the fact of the matter is that the human body is more than able to easily take an iron, take the other components that are required to make hemoglobin, and do that, right? Especially in the context of a healthy digestive system that is strong and resilient and able to absorb the iron from the diet, from the foods. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. What's also interesting about the absorption of heme versus non-heme iron is that our intestines have a very unique way of regulating how much iron is absorbed through the intestines. So if we don't have enough iron, it will actually upregulate the amount of iron absorbed. And if we have too much iron, it will slow down the amount that's absorbed. However, this only works for non-heme iron. So for heme iron just, goes across the intestines without any kind of regulatory system. I think that's why people say it's more absorbable.
Okay.
But we see that for people, like we said before, there's also issues for people having too much iron. And that's always in the case of eating too much red meat.
So it seems like it comes down to quality over quantity, as is the case with so many things in life and in the body. The quality iron from plants versus the quantity of heme iron from animal flesh seems to do the trick for most people.
Yeah. But so let's talk a little bit more about heme iron and some of the potential issues that come up with heme iron.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, we know that heme iron promotes the growth of cancer in the body. That's one thing that has been studied and verified.
And it does so because it's a pro-oxidant. And so what this means is it increases the amount of free radicals in the body. It also increases DNA damage, which can then lead to cancer and other diseases. It's also linked with diabetes. It's linked with atherosclerosis and other heart disease. And I want to share these statistics because I found these. So for every increase in 1 milligram of heme iron that you take in one day, there's a 27% increase in the risk of heart disease. Same for diabetes, an increase in 16% risk.
For 1 milligram of hemoglobin?
Yeah.
Do we know, is that like a serving of meat?
I don't know how much that actually breaks down to.
Okay. But 1 milligram, big increase of cardiovascular disease, diabetes.
And then also a 12% increased risk of cancer for every 1 milligram of iron increase.
So that's heme iron, this molecule that we're told a lot of the times by our doctors, by the meat industry, by a lot of people, we need heme iron to build and maintain healthy blood cells. And it just isn't true. It's just not true. But I don't know. One thing that's coming up for me is because iron is like one component of building healthy red blood cells, iron from plants. But the interesting thing about iron in the form of plants is that, in these green leafy vegetables that are rich in iron, they're also rich in chlorophyll, which have essentially, chlorophyll is like the hemoglobin molecule, but for plants. And the only distinction between chlorophyll and hemoglobin is that in place of the iron in the human body, there's magnesium in plants. But the other components of the hemoglobin molecule, this elaborate porphyrin ring structure that carries the iron in the case of, in the case of human beings, and magnesium in the case of plants, we're able to extract those elements of the molecule and kind of resynthesize them and kind of use them as the building blocks to recreate hemoglobin in the human body. So it's kind of like the idea of this, synergistic effect with the iron in green leafy vegetables and also the chlorophyll. So iron supplements may not be the answer either, right? Because they don't have the other aspects of the chlorophyll compounds that are needed to create the hemoglobin molecule. So anyway, that's where my mind always thinks about like the optimal synergistic effects that whole plants carry. And that's just one example of that.
Yeah, so let's shift into talking about how to heal iron deficiency, anemia, naturally
I thought we
with
just did that.
Well, we did, but there are other factors. And, you just brought up supplements. And I think for some people that are feeling very symptomatic and have a very, very low ferritin, I think that it's okay to do a short period of supplementation, because that's how they're going to feel fastest. And there are some great supplements out there that I think do have more of a synergistic effect within the blend of the supplement, because there's some vitamin C, there's also some herbs that really promote the absorption of iron. And
and it's important to know that supplements are not curing the iron deficiency.
Right.
They are managing the symptoms of iron deficiency by giving the raw materials, but not really curing the underlying cause that created the iron deficient state.
Exactly. So that's really the most important thing, is to figure out what is the underlying cause. A lot of times it is inflammation in the gut, because that is very common now.
Or heavy menstrual cycles.
Or a combination of both. And so we can certainly support those with, lifestyle and our other naturopathic modalities. But yeah, in specifically correcting the iron deficiency anemia, there are some other things that help. And besides focusing on eating foods that are very rich in iron, which if you are eating a whole food plant-based diet, you are getting enough iron. But like we said before, vitamin C is a great thing to take to help the absorption of iron, because it acidifies your gut as you take the vitamin C, and that creates an optimal environment for easier passageway of iron through your intestines.
And then the other thing that can get in the way that we haven't talked about are
calcium.
Calcium can inhibit the absorption of iron.
It competes for the binding site.
And then, but there's also is it phytates? Tannins, like in green tea and black tea. But that seems to be an issue only with people who have an irritated gut, who are more susceptible to the potential inflammatory effects of phytates in the diet, who don't have the resilient microbiome. And we just talked about this. Was it just last week that we talked about? I think, or maybe 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we talked about lectins and phytates and oxalates.
And we said that if you are eating an optimal diet, you have the bacteria in your gut that breaks down phytates efficiently.
We won't reiterate ourselves here
with that. Yeah, so phytates and tannins, like we said. So if you're really aggressively wanting to do everything you can in your power to increase your iron absorption, cutting out black tea and green tea. Yeah.
And then you've got some foods here.
Yeah, we already mentioned them. Whole grains. Beans are very high in iron. And like Ben said, the green leafy vegetables, very high. Also nuts and seeds, we didn't mention. But basically, there's a little bit of iron in all plants.
Yeah, when we, if you guys are familiar with the app Chronometer, which kind of tracks your macronutrients, your micronutrients, your vitamins, minerals, all that kind of good stuff. When we do assess iron or assess our dietary intake over a day, everything is optimal, but iron, including iron.
And the great thing about the kind of iron that we eat is that we don't need to worry about getting too much of it, because there's
that regulatory mechanism in the gut.
Exactly.
Yeah. So and the other thing about the foods that have the high amounts of iron, the whole grains, the legumes, the dark leafy vegetables, these things, they also are the foods that help promote and maintain a healthy gut. And we can't emphasize the importance of maintaining that healthy gut for optimal absorption and immune function and all of the things that our microbiome provide us. So it's not like we're healing iron deficiency while neglecting all other aspects of your health. It's very much a comprehensive, holistic, obviously, approach, as natural healing always is. So anything else?
I think that's it. I think we covered it.
Cool, we did it. And hopefully you guys learned something about iron deficiency and how you don't need to eat heme iron from animal flesh to cure it. In fact, like in the case of Susanna, it could just exacerbate it by exacerbating the underlying cause of gastrointestinal inflammation, irritation, that sort of thing.
And you could actually heal your iron deficiency anemia with plants.
Yep, that might in fact be really the only way to really do it. I don't know. Prove me wrong. No fights, please.
So I want to put in a little plug for a couple of things we've got going on. This Saturday, July 20th, we are hosting a free online webinar on the topic of living a detoxifying lifestyle. And if you're interested in registering for that, there is a link in our Instagram bio. We will include a link in our Facebook description and our...
You'll find it.
You'll find it.
Go to, I think the URL is community.alter.health/detox webinar.
And then also what we've got going on all the time is our online healing community, where we have weekly live meetings with our community members and we discuss whatever topics they bring to the table. And if you want to try a free 2-week trial of that, you can sign up at alter.health/healing-community. The link is also in our bio.
Yeah, so you can sign up now and you can gain access to the next 2 weeks of live meetings and also dozens of weeks of past meetings where you can go back in history and watch all the content that we covered in those weeks. And really, they're rich conversations, and we get to see your face and hear your voice, and it's pretty cool. So learn more at www.alter.health, and that's enough for now. We look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a wonderful, happy, healthy rest of your week and weekend. Peace and love, and until next time.
Bye for now.